Welcome to our Lunch and Learn this afternoon on internal controls for board members. Before we get started with the program today, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and thank all of our 2022 corporate supporters. And I'd especially like to thank the L&L Nippert Charitable Foundation for their funding of today's program. Many of the law firms and corporations that you see on this list not only provide financial support to PBPO, but are also the source of our hundreds of attorney volunteers. We couldn't do our work without them. I'd like to mention our mission. Powered by attorney volunteers, we strengthen our community by providing free business legal services and education to nonprofits. In the 7 years since PBPO has been around, we have given over $6 million in free legal services through the generosity of more than 800 attorney volunteers who've helped more than 280 local nonprofits. We do have criteria for nonprofits that can become PBPO clients. The criteria is listed here and also on our website, along with a brief application. So if you're interested, please go to our website to apply. If you have any questions about whether or not you qualify, please reach out to Veronica in our office. We do try to have a generous heart with who we take on as a client. These are the types of legal projects we handle. And if you are a client or become one, this is what you can expect from PBPO. You'll get quality legal services from experienced company and law firm attorneys who have subject matter expertise. You'll also get a staff attorney like me who can help out with nonprofit legal issues and also oversee each and every project we place with an attorney volunteer. Whether or not you're a client, you can participate in our educational outreach programs, like the webinar that you're attending today. These are low cost or free resources. We also have a lot of other resources on our website. Here are some of the upcoming webinars that you are welcome to attend. We'd love to see you there. So if you'd like to get more information about us, apply to become a client, receive our newsletter, or take a look at our free resources online, please go to our website at pbpohio.org or send questions to info@pbpohio.org. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I'll just mention that I'll be monitoring the Q&A during the presentation. If you have questions, please post them there. You can use the chat feature, but we'd prefer that you put questions for the speaker in the Q&A. And Stephanie will stop periodically to see if there are questions and hopefully have a few minutes at the end for questions as well. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Stephanie Allgeyer. She is from the accounting firm of VonLehman. Stephanie is a shareholder at VonLehman, and she's also the director of assurance services there. She leads the firm's nonprofit services group and is a certified fraud examiner. In addition to all of that, Stephanie is a great friend and supporter of PBPO. She's helped our staff, our clients many times, and I'm so thrilled to have her speak with you today. So with that, thank you, Stephanie, and I'll turn it over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can start yours.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for the kind words as well. I truly appreciate that. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can get started here. Okay, hopefully everything is showing up there. But I certainly do want to thank everybody for having us today. It's always a pleasure to be able to partner with PBPO, especially as it comes to engaging with board members and sharing resources that we may have. So very, very happy to have that. And let's go back here. So we're talking about internal controls today, and many of you that are on right now are board members, and where we can talk about how that goes and flows specifically with board members. What we need to remember is that for us to oversee processes and understand how things should be at the organizations that we oversee, we truly probably need to have a little bit of an understanding of internal controls so that we can monitor their efficiency and their effectiveness. So at the end of the day, we probably need to just understand the general definition of internal controls, which most think and they hear internal controls and they think specifically segregation of duties. That's really all it is. And that really truly is just a very, very small part of what internal controls are at an organization. It's a much larger mechanism. So ultimately an internal control, and this is just merely the definition, is a process. It's affected by an entity's board of directors, being you, management, and other personnel, designed to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of objectives. And these objectives are important, and we're going to go through those as we talk about some things over the next hour. So the following categories are reliability of financial reporting, the effectiveness and efficiency of operations, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. But, somewhat about what we're here today is specific to the board. But again, we're going to go through a multitude of things, sharing how it does relate to the board member as well. So internal controls, as we talk, and just a reminder that the board itself, as you've probably heard in other PBPO type presentations that you've attended, is the governing body of an organization. And therefore, the board is tasked with setting the tone and taking on fiduciary responsibility. I think oftentimes it is overlooked at how the responsibility of what the governing body is, not just to be a sounding board, but really, truly, you are responsible for that fiduciary responsibility that goes along with an organization. And some things to remember when we talk about that type of setting the tone or the fiduciary responsibility is that the executive director reports to the board. Sometimes we have a little bit more difficulty when maybe we have an organization that has been founded, and that executive director is the founder, and the board really doesn't want to step on their toes. But ultimately, the executive director is a member of the organization, is typically a paid employee, and that employee reports to the board. So the board is responsible for governing, and the executive director is responsible for managing. So that's important as we go through and talk about some of these concepts. Management is responsible for developing and actually boots on the ground, making sure that the structure of internal control and some of the objectives we'll talk about are actually implemented. But the board is responsible for making sure and monitoring that the executive director is doing what they are to disseminate to the rest of their management, that there's proper structure and kind of overseeing and making sure that that's in place. Now, you may be thinking as we go through a lot of these concepts today and some of these items is to think about the board that you specifically sit on. And some of you may be involved with much smaller organizations that don't have a lot of structure. And we will talk about those small organizations today and hit a little bit about that. But sometimes you may think about yourself and your board and think, I'm a working board. And so at that point, the governing board, the board of directors may serve as a significant component of those internal controls. And that could be, maybe your board treasurer signs checks, a little bit deeper dive into the financial statements, reviewing bank reconciliations, reviewing payroll, looking at executive director or members of management, some of the funds that they're using, these types of things. But all in all, when we talk about internal controls and the function of executive directors, boards, and members of management, it's a good concept to have, but really, truly, we need to understand what is the importance and why is it important to make sure we have those. So when we talk about the importance of things, we need to identify, well, what are the risks? And can I kind of thinking about the boards that you may sit on and their organizations that you serve a purpose for, what are the risks if we don't have the proper internal controls in place? And remember, it's more than just segregation of duties. We'll talk about the objectives. We're going to take each one of these and kind of put them into those objectives that we talked about. So there's the sheer misappropriation of funds. And this is what we consider theft. These are just theft of funds, theft of dollars, theft of time, all kinds of things go along with that. Inadequate financial reporting. Inadequate financial reporting comes along with what we consider misinformed decisions. So if an organization is deciding on whether they have the funds available to start a new program or to fund a grant to somewhere, and you have inadequate financial reporting, well, if we have inadequate financial reporting, it's very difficult to make informed decisions. So what if we don't have that proper financial reporting? We make a decision that is in fact misinformed, and it turns out we did not have exactly what we had in terms of those types of things. Loss of funding, it's very simple, and in some internal control environments, to lose funding, or even which could be worse, is the loss of the nonprofit status. Accidental errors, it's not fraud per se, but accidental errors could be a pretty significant component of what could go wrong when we talk about internal controls. And then just the sheer inefficiency of operations. And, it's not really necessarily that anything is wrong per se when we talk about inefficiencies, but where are we taking time away from? Where are we taking, which is a precious resource, as we all know right now, is people. And that's the rising cost with that. So now is the time, as we're seeing those costs rise, a lack of people availability, is to really look at the efficiency in our operations, redundancies that we may have in our process. So these are just some of the associated risks, but we're going to take those risks and kind of put them in terms of what our objectives are, the achievement of our objectives for the three components that we talked about earlier when we went over the definition of internal control. So when we talk about reliability of financial reporting, the two concepts that fall mostly under there are inadequate financial reporting and misinformed decisions. And that really speaks to the reliability of financial reporting. So you as a board member, hopefully, every time that you meet, specifically if you are on the finance committee, if you are receiving financial information, the biggest thing is, do you understand what you're looking at? And is what you have reliable? And is it adequate enough for you to be able to make a decision, not only at the board level, but can your management that was inside of your nonprofit, does it have adequate financial reporting and able to make reliable, decisions moving forward? So it's good that you're receiving financial information, but we need it to be adequate and be basically reliable. The second is the effectiveness and efficiency of operations. So the three concepts and risks that can mostly fall into this bucket are misappropriation of funds, which obviously it would be those theft items, accidental errors, and inefficiencies in operations. And when we talk about number two, these things cost us money, which we don't have a lot of. There are diminishing funds out there for a lot of nonprofits, not all, but some. And like we said, rising costs across the board. Every industry is seeing this. So number two is extremely important in terms of where we are right now, especially post-COVID, coming out of a lot of people retiring as well. So, these three items that fall under number two here are the things that cost nonprofits money. And we'll talk a little bit later about what that looks like just in the nonprofit scheme of things. So number three is something that maybe isn't talked about very often, although PBPO does do a fantastic job of kind of focusing on these types of things, especially being on the law side of things, but is compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So a lot of the idea of a nonprofit is obviously to be in perpetuity, but ideally the thought of that can be taken away as well. So if one and two tend to happen quite often or are substantial enough, number three is a given, the compliance with applicable laws and regulations. And a lot of this goes with when somebody gives you maybe federal funding or a grant, are you doing everything that is expected of you? Plus, on the legal side of things, especially being in the state of Ohio, are you following all the necessary rules that come along with the Attorney General? But that could result in a loss of funding if you're not doing what you need to do for compliance purposes, and certainly a loss of nonprofit status, which is a whole nother game once that occurs. It's difficult to get back. Typically involves, the use of an attorney. And if you can't get it back, then comes with paying tax as well. So that's something that obviously would want to be avoided. When we talk about the reliability of financial reporting, we're kind of going to go through each of these objectives and talk a little bit more about the importance of those. So the reliability of financial reporting, specifically, we'll go back here and look, inadequate financial decisions, reporting misinformed decisions. So what you need to have, the controls that you need to have at your organization, is somebody within, or a paid consultant or somebody in your board that has the skills, knowledge, and experience in order to know that what they're providing to you and what they're capturing in the financial statements are actually reliable and adequate and efficient. Timely and accurate financial reporting. Obviously, as an auditor, my goal is to issue a set of audited financial statements as close to the year end as possible, because if it's 9, 10, 11 months after year end, those certainly are not timely. They may be accurate. I hope they are. But if they're not timely, then it's stale information and it's not useful. The last thing that we want to do is out as a board of directors be making significant financial decisions based on things, money or numbers that are just stale in terms of timeliness. So making sure that you're getting this financial information timely. And then reconciliations and reviews are, and this kind of goes along with some of those internal controls or monitoring per se. Some of this could be performed by a board. Are the numbers that you're receiving on your balance sheet or your statement of that position or your profit and loss, are those numbers actually reconciled? And then are those reconciliations subsequently reviewed by somebody for making sure that they are reliable for financial reporting? So, all three of these concepts, this reliability of financial reporting, what is the biggest, thing that could go along with that is obviously financial statement fraud. So this is some of these statistics that I'm giving you are actually from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which on a yearly basis does a report to the nation where they talk about everything, all the frauds that have been reported. Now, keep in mind, most frauds, sadly, are not reported. So this is just based on reported items, and they do a good job of breaking it down between types of industries. But in terms of financial statement fraud, and these are things that are manipulations, maybe think about your Enron side of things. But 10% of cases are financial statement manipulation. So it's not a lot of cases of the fraud. So it's a very limited scope of the fraud. However, it yields the highest loss. So $954,000 is the median loss. So when we talk, so it doesn't happen all the time. When it happens, it's a big dollar amount. I mean, $954,000 is a pretty significant median loss. So the next objective is the effectiveness and efficiency of operations. And just to remind, that's actually the actual theft of time, of money, accidental errors, or the inefficiencies in our operations. So, making sure that we have those proper procedures, policies, and procedures, that we actually adhere to them. I do a lot of internal control reviews, more of the making sure that fraud, not necessarily the detection, but focus more on the prevention side of things. It's amazing how many organizations have really rock solid proper policies and procedures, but the realm of the amount of employees that don't truly understand those policies and procedures, meaning we're not adhering to them, so they are not in fact effective. Proper segregation of duties or compensating controls. A lot of organizations can't afford nor have the manpower for full-blown segregation of duties, but there is another concept on top of that called compensating controls. So if we possibly have somebody that has one similar function within one thing, let's say it's cash disbursements per se, but we have a compensating control that is somebody monitoring that on the back end, kind of reviewing it. And then the removal of redundancies or irrelevance. I oftentimes have people that will have multiple levels of review, and is that really important to have that multiple level of review? Oftentimes we'll have someone where we'll have an employee that will cut checks, and then subsequent to that will be given to somebody to sign the check. But if that check goes directly back to that person who cut the original check and has access to that whole having somebody else cut that check has become completely irrelevant, and is actually a little bit of a hiccup in those segregation of duties and those controls that can go along with things. So it's really looking at the scheme of things and who can do what. So asset misappropriation, and again, this is from the ACFE, but this is the consideration of theft. So theft, obviously, 86% of the time in fraud cases that are, again, reported, it's 86% of the time it is some sort of theft. That could be time, that could be money, it could be all kinds of things, but in terms of an actual misappropriation, but it does yield the lowest median loss, which would be $100,000. But In the grand scheme of things, thinking about your organization, any amount of theft, especially when we're talking about money that has either come from the government, foundations, or the general public itself, the general public has no realm whatsoever as to a materiality threshold. So they're not happy with a $2 theft, let alone a $100 million theft. So our last item is the compliance with laws and regulations. Let's go back here and we'll see, what could happen. What is the risk associated with those objectives? And that is the loss of funding and the loss of nonprofit status. So when we talk about those items that are within there, what do we need to do? What are our controls? So understanding the laws within each state. And this is not just the state that maybe you are domiciled in, because as we know, the charitable registration has tightened a little, and understanding what the nexus is in each state, and making sure that you're understanding the laws within the states that you may have that charitable registration requirement in. And then the communication of requirements. There's a lot of our board members may be for-profit folks, and understanding what the requirements are in the laws that are in the nonprofit sector it could be quite different. And also too, if we have any turnover within an organization itself, and members of management or people that are overseeing a component of our internal controls, maybe our compliance with other certain types of things, making sure that they understand the requirements with all of our laws and regulations. And what goes along with communication to that is obviously training of employees and board members to make sure. Our board members need to come with a little bit of understanding, but it is really truly the organizations that really need to step up and say, this is what is specific to us. So there's an overall estimate of about 5% of revenue that's lost to this type of fraud each year. It is typically maybe not with the law side of things, but more on the compliance side of things. So when we talk about fraud itself, so the fraud triangle, because we're going to talk for the rest of the time, probably mostly about one of these concepts, but I want to go over what each of the concepts are. So the fraud triangle itself was created by Donald Cressy ages ago, a long time ago, and it still holds the test of time, as it should. It's a triangle. They are hard to break. But so what it comes down to is that there are 3 factors, and all 3 factors must be present at the same time for an ordinary person. Ordinary person, keep that in mind. There are some people that no matter what, these could be present. They could have no forceful for anything to want to commit fraud. They just do, it's in their nature. So all 3 of these factors at the same time for an ordinary person to commit fraud. And those are financial pressure. These are such things such as if I had a family member that was ill that I needed to take care of, and it didn't have the means in which to do that, that would be considered a financial pressure. Or that there was a gambling addiction that needed to be funding, that's certainly a financial pressure as well. Rationalization. And this could be, my organization, I don't feel supported in my organization. I don't have the tools necessary. I'm not paid enough, those types of things. So number one, there's really nothing that you can do about that other than recognize when it is there, is from a board perspective. And we'll talk about some triggers and some things to watch towards the end of the presentation. Rationalization also, you don't really have too much to do with that. However, I definitely would make sure that your organization, that you're not the cause of it. That it's not, people aren't significantly underpaid in terms of the market, that everybody has what's considered maybe a close rationalization for enjoying their opportunities there. The third thing, which is full blown everything that you can do with that, and the one that we're going to focus on, is opportunity. So it's the only thing that you as an organization truly have control over, is the opportunity. So the opportunity is that when those 1 and 2, so when the financial pressure and the rationalization are there, the third thing, the opportunity, is a person's solution to meet those other 2 pieces of the triangle. And all they truly need is the perception of the opportunity. The opportunity doesn't necessarily have to be there, but it's the perception itself that they have a method in order to commit fraud. So basically, as an organization, when we talk about, the 3 sides of a triangle, the one that's most important to you as a board member to make sure that members of your management are taken care of is the removal of the opportunity and the perception of it. So what I'm going to go through is 3 examples of maybe some pretty significant cases that have occurred. And we're going to focus on the opportunity perspective of what was there. I can tell you that each member of each people, persons that these focus on, they all had the rationalization and they all had the need, the financial pressure, but they all certainly had the opportunity. And had the opportunity been removed, the perception of it had been removed, these frauds most likely would not have occurred. Now, if there is the perception of opportunity, yet the opportunity itself is not there, so the fraud may occur, but the likelihood of the magnitude, if there is no opportunity, the likelihood of the magnitude of the fraud itself is going to be much less, because most likely it will go detected rather than undetected. If there's perception of opportunity and an actual opportunity, you run the risk of losing $54 million over a 20-year span. This is the city of Dixon, Illinois, and very, very extremely small town. And they had an employee who was there for ages, named Rita Crunwell, and she rose up the ranks in the city. Again, it's an extremely small city. And she had unbelievable amounts of access. So she had access to financial records, bank accounts, signing authority. She was the main person on all of their bank accounts. And because of all this, and because of how much everybody trusted her, and there was certainly the perception of opportunity, but an incredible opportunity as well, she was able to create a bank account that nobody at the city knew about, the city building itself. And she spent years creating fictitious invoices from the state of Illinois specific to construction projects and maintenance. And eventually, in the shortened story, but if you ever want to know the full story, this is actually a documentary and a movie that you can get on, I think, Apple Plus maybe. And so she would transfer the money to her own bank account. She had a very lavish life. She showed quarter horses, and really maybe wasn't as fully paid as what she felt maybe that she would be. However, for absolutely 20 years, she was able to take $54 million, and the city itself, it went fairly undetected. It was actually a bank that brought it forward, plus their internal clerk as well. However, the biggest thing to note is that because she was able to take so much money and because the opportunity was there, the people that kind of paid the price were the citizens of Dixon, Illinois, because she always went to the city council and she always had an answer for what things were. And they ended up, just lowering their expense budgets and raising taxes like crazy. So everybody really paid the price on this one. But at the end of the day, Rita had some of the most unbelievable opportunity at any one organization because they trusted her. They trusted her so much that she was able to do whatever she wanted. And she basically had control over every single thing at the city. Little closer to home. This is Meet NKY, not too long ago, maybe 5 years or so. Little bit shorter time frame, $3.8 million in 16 to 18 months. This is the Northern Kentucky Convention and Visitor Bureau Center. That's the longer name. Currently in jail. So Miss Johnson, shouldn't say necessarily allegedly anymore. I stole this from another PowerPoint, this specific slide. So she's been convicted. She definitely exploited her position and her extreme opportunity that she had within the books and the finances of Meet NKY and was able to leverage the internal policies. So this is an exact quote, but Johnson allegedly exploited her position and leveraged her internal processes and safeguards they had in place for her personal gain by stealing organizational funds and betraying the trust. And they certainly were able to go through their controls and get all of that hammered out. So essentially what Johnson had availability to was full availability to write checks, sign checks, and also she was able to have full access to the accounting records plus the banking records themselves, and was able to transfer a significant large set of money. And another concept that was missing here as well is the idea of monitoring from the board. There wasn't a lot of financial information that was shared with the board. Certainly now there is a heightened level of that. but they were looking at much more condensed level. So at the end of the day, it for 16 to 18 months, 3.8 million is a decent amount of money. And there was certainly a lot of opportunity with her having full access to all the accounting records, all the payroll records, and all the banking records as well. So she was able to transfer money back and forth, and for that to go undetected and eventually get it out of the organization through ACH transfers. Just a side note, when we do have an organization that heavily utilizes online payment systems for things, especially when we talk about ACHs, make sure that you are utilizing a financial institution which does have the capability to have one person, and that one person can only generate the ACH, and it takes another person to actually get that submitted and to be sent out from the bank. So ACHs are difficult to detect because when you look at your bank account, it just has a large number and nobody really knows what that number is. It's not like a check that's been written to so-and-so grass cutting agency or anything like that. So, and sometimes when we have somebody looking at bank accounts, maybe they might skirt over that. So that's just a little added comment there. But this is quite a while ago, Covington, Kentucky, smaller amount over a long period of time. But Bob Dew had a tremendous amount of opportunity and control of things. He would sneak into the city building after hours and create fake vendor names with inside the system, and write a check to one of those vendors, enter the payment information, print the check, delete the check's history from the printer to avoid detection, change the name of the system back to the original vendor's name, and then deposit the money to a personal account. I can tell you there are about 8 issues with what the availability of what he was able to do, plus opportunity and issues within their accounting system. The ability to be able to write a check and to subsequently go in and change the name of that is a significant issue. That provides a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I don't think I can lobby to the accounting softwares of the world enough to try to get that to stop being able to happen. So, but it is something that we see quite often. But, you know, a dozen years, $800,000, I mean, it's not a significant amount of money every year, but when you're talking about taxpayer dollars, and certainly a city of Northern Kentucky, again, it could be $2 and people would not be overly thrilled about it. But Bob had not only the ability to do all of what is on the screen right now, but he also had the ability to change passwords, and he had tremendous IT functionality within the city as well. So this is a pretty significant idea of opportunity too. So before I go on, Erin, do we have any questions that you'd like me to address?
We do have a couple of questions. I don't know if these are things that you're going to talk about in the second half, so
Okay.
Feel free to push them to the end if they are.
Okay.
But we have a question about remote workers.
Yep.
And we're definitely seeing that with a lot of clients now, allowing employees to work from home in remote and flexible positions. So what are some areas of risk specifically related to having remote workers?
Yep, we are definitely going to go over that, but that is something that is certainly something that needs to be looked at, and not only looked at from an idea of remote workers, but just looked at in terms of, I can't imagine that there's a single organization that did not change some sort of functionality as a result of COVID. Whether we figured out a more efficient way to do things, whether we are down people, whether we have more people there, I can't imagine there's a single organization that does not have some sort of changes. And it's probably been a long time since many organizations have really looked at the functionality of their controls. So it's a good time to do it anyway. But coming out of COVID, where we are with not only remote workers, hybrid workers, outsourced workers, people that don't even work for our organization that we're paying on contract, we're seeing an increase in that as well. But just all minute, little tiny changes that have been made too can actually have a tremendous impact. So we're going to go over some of those things.
Great, thank you. I'll give you one more question now.
Okay.
It's about an organization that only has an executive director and a board, no other paid staff. So what are some practical ideas, or what's realistic for an organization that only has those people to rely on?
Yes, and this is an incredibly common question that we get when we talk about internal controls and when we go through these. And ironically, I have included this slide. We typically go through a 2, 3, and 4. But for purposes of today, because we do want to talk about some of the remote things, is we are going to go over what it looks like for a 2-person concept. And we're going to talk about the fact that that is doable. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, we can't have solid internal controls or good internal controls because we only have an executive director. And you hear that quite often, but I can tell you that it is 100% doable. Some people may not like the answer to that because it does involve a little bit of your board, but we'll talk about that in a few. So, but all great questions, obviously, since we are going to talk about those things. So one thing I do want to stress is that most of your organizations are probably audited. And there's a lot of reliance that is put on an audit. And I do want to remind you that an audit is not designed to detect fraud. I can tell you that all three of the organizations that we just briefly spoke about were undergoing audits and had auditors. A couple of them had very qualified auditors. And if schemes are good and people are good at their fraud, it's sometimes very difficult to detect. But at the end of the day, your audit is not designed to detect fraud. If it is uncovered, then it is we are required to bring it forward and let you know that it has occurred in the magnitude and go through the proper channels. However, it's not designed to detect fraud. So I want to stress the fact that proper internal controls, proper monitoring, and everything that goes along with that is the best way to prevent fraud, but also the best way to detect fraud. So when we talk about nonprofit fraud, which is actually quite different than for-profit fraud, and basically studies show that nonprofits, we have less people to our disposal. We have such a mission focus that we have fewer anti-fraud controls in place, which actually leaves us much more vulnerable to fraud. So the top three internal control weaknesses are 35% just the complete lack of internal controls, 19% of lack of management review. So this is the reliance on people underneath you to kind of do anything without any sort of review or without any sort of monitoring. And then a 14% is an override of existing controls. And this is something that we consider most of the time to be performed at the management level. So management override. But oftentimes we do see where people that are working in accounting softwares or other types of things have the capabilities to override or skirt around because they are not held accountable for the internal controls that are there. Kind of what I mentioned with Mr. Do is that he was able to come in and change passwords and change things. So that's an override of an existing internal control. So basically you have an internal control, but the internal control is not working. So when we talk about internal controls and the functionality of all of those, we can think about who does what in the organization, but it's not necessarily just who does what, but who has access to what. Sometimes those frauds are actually committed by people that just have access, but that's not their daily function, but they figured out that that's something that they have access to. So in terms of nonprofits themselves, so the percent of cases, and this is effective for 2021. So this is everything. These are the types of frauds that occurred during 2021 and the percentage of what happened. So corruption was the highest and typically is the highest in most industries. Billing, remember there are many nonprofits that fall in the realm of medical practices and do a lot of Medicaid, Medicare, insurance type billings. And so billing practices, and this could also be grant billings, those types of things out to the federal government, other types, expense reimbursements, and expense reimbursements are sometimes overlooked just because our people that have expense reimbursements are typically our higher up people, sometimes our management, but it's also sometimes some of our compliance folks. But that's 23%. And those may be big things or they may be small things, but at the end of the day, they all kind of add up. So, but ultimately you can see the amount of nonprofit schemes there and the percentage of cases. And again, this was 2021, so COVID, but this changes from time to time, but generally kind of looks exactly like this most of the time. So here we go with the examples. When we talk about the nonprofit, a lot, like I mentioned, a lot of times we have the functionality where we just don't have that many people. We have a lot of small nonprofits too that serve a big purpose. And they're just like, they just put a lot of apples into the executive director, and that comes with a lot of trust. But remember, back to the very beginning of the presentation, the the controls themselves, so we have two. If we have two people, and most at limited, you have an executive director and you've got a board of directors. So what I have right here in front of you is if you have an executive director and a bookkeeper. And at any point, most nonprofits will have that executive director, and we put a lot of trust in that executive director. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe too much sometimes. So when we just had the executive director, Aaron, to kind of answer the question that was posed, when we just have an executive director, what we'll do for what you're looking at on the screen here is the executive director would flip over to the left, and the right side of things would be the functionality of a member of the board or one or two members of the board. What you're looking at right now is actually if you have two members of the organization. And sometimes when we're talking about internal controls, we're thinking just about the accounting function. But at the end of the day, we are completely underutilizing as an industry, multiple people within the organization. I can tell you that the most underutilized person all the time in every organization is the receptionist. Even at VonLehman Company, we use our receptionist to open the mail and perform certain functions of our internal controls, such as when checks come in, if they do come into the building, she will stamp those checks for deposit only. But she has no access to our accounting system. So it's a perfect control for incoming cash to be performed by a member of the company that has no functionality within the accounting system. So sometimes we think we only have one person in our accounting department. That's okay. We can utilize a plethora of people that are nowhere near our accounting department. So when we think about the functions of accounting, which is the way that people most think about it, we need to look outside of that accounting department. But when we do have an executive director, obviously, and nobody else, but we do have a board. Obviously, that board of directors is going to play a role in our internal control in some function, and they need to understand their role and how important that is. Because the last thing that we want to do is to not understand our importance as a board member and the understanding of the executive director or the other board members of our function within the internal controls and not be performing those. Because that's when things can go south, held accountable, those types of things. So what you're looking at is the example controls for two people. And just to answer the question, switch the executive director over to the left, your one on the right, it would be performed. And these are just some examples of things. Obviously, this doesn't mention anything about payroll, but this is more so around the cash function. And you can see the things on the right are more of a monitoring type thing, rather than the things on the left, which are more of the doing. So, well, remote and COVID considerations obviously is a world we're still trying to figure this out. And it, we all did not enjoy COVID. I guess we can all probably admit that. But I think the best thing that we can say that came out of COVID was heightened sense of a lot of things. And I'm glad that we have that heightened sense of a lot of things. It's upsetting why we have them, but it did bring some things to light. One of those things is cybersecurity. And this has been a thing for a plethora of years. And many nonprofits thought, they're not really going after us. They're going after people that have very important information. And, if you have donor databases, if you are a medical organization, obviously you're huge in the market, but they're going after donor databases as well. So employee information, they're really going off after everything. So cybersecurity plays a big and much heightened risk in our remote and COVID considerations, and along with the integrity of our data. So obviously we have people on their home networks, that type of thing. And I think this was the easiest thing to identify for a lot of people was the risk when we talk about home networks. And are they as structurally sound as are they as firewalled as they would be if you are in your own office? Or the concept of many people are working fully remotely, not even at their house, it's somewhere else, on the beach, at a Starbucks, at a Panera, anywhere that they may be. So how secure are those items when they are logging into your banking system and playing around? That data, those fingerprints are there. So it's not really just about how they get into your specific drives at your organization, but all the other softwares and all the other things that they are accessing on the internet. So I encourage you and I urge you that if your organization does not have cybersecurity insurance, and it may be built into your umbrella, but if it's built into your umbrella, it may not be adequate. But I do urge you to take a look at your cybersecurity insurance policies, and if you don't have one at all, please talk to an insurance specialist. And there are actually insurance companies that specialize in nonprofit, because there are different things that we have to deal with. Many of the for-profit and many of the insurance companies don't understand that we need insurance centered around volunteerism and cybersecurity specific to maybe patient data or all these types of things. So I do encourage you to seek out a nonprofit specific insurance company if you'd like. So as I talked about earlier, the reassessment of controls, and especially those affected during the pandemic, and again, this is the best time. It is looking at the access. There were a lot of controls that we had to throw to the wind. We just basically had to say, we got to keep going our mission. We've got to do what we've got to do. We'll worry about it later. We just have to do. And making sure that we rein those controls back in that were possibly thrown to the wind. And it's a good time. Anytime is a good time to reassess your controls, to be quite honest. It should be done every couple of years, because you will have things that will change in your environment and change within your the people that you have in your market. But now, because of the effect of the pandemic, that type of thing, some of those things that could change is the changes in staffing and the sizing of staffing. And who does what. I guarantee you that there are probably some redundancies that could be identified, and we need to find more efficient and effective ways to do things as we have those changes in staffing and sizing of staffing. New risks, obviously economic uncertainties is a really big thing. Not knowing where things are, if funds will deplete. We have a lot of people that have new pressures inside of them. A lack of maybe a spouse has lost a job, had to take a pay cut. We have children that we're taking care of. So there's a whole plethora of new pressures that are out there. But when we talk about remote work itself, as I know that question was posed, it is really about top left-hand corner is that cybersecurity side of things and the reassessment of controls, specifically because, again, we were trying to keep our doors open. We were trying to get money. We were trying to sustain in a COVID world that we didn't know when it was going to end or how it was really going to affect us. So we're happy to be maybe on a different end of that. However, but the forefront thought of where are we on our internal controls may have hit the back burner. So they really, truly need to be looked at. And the biggest thing I would start with is the access. A lot of people were provided access to things that they've never had before. Because somebody would get sick. We are remote now. We're paying things online. We've never done that. So when we just, fire drilled, installed that type of thing, we really probably didn't put controls around that to start off with. So now is a great time to really truly go through everything that we have. Another concept is the monitoring of employees and their time. We see a lot of memes. We see a lot of videos of people that have figured out how to keep their mouse moving to make sure that they're logged in. Taking tremendous breaks, as hard as this is going to say, taking tremendous breaks, that's still organization time. And putting on a timesheet or not working when we're supposed to be is misappropriation of funds. It's theft of time. It's theft of time that I should be giving to my organization. So figuring out a way to make sure that your staff is still giving everything that they're supposed to be giving at that time frame is another concept. So just some things to think about. But when we talk about the board itself, a big thing that we can talk about is oversight and monitoring. So when we've got maybe limited internal controls, those segregation of duties we talked about. So we can play that with the concept that monitoring is a significant control. So most of the monitoring, especially if we have a smaller organization, can be performed by the board. So, things, and these are just some examples. One thing to stress as we go through these things is that there's not a handbook or a written set of rules for internal controls that make sense for every organization. Every organization is different. The skills of everybody within your organization are different. The makeup of your board is different. your revenue is different, your expenses are different, your payroll is different. So keep in mind when we go through some of these things, some of these tips and tricks and oversights and monitoring, that not everything fits every organization. So if you're not sure how to go about approaching, looking at your controls and kind of thinking about some of these items, especially post-COVID world, it's good to reach out to a professional and go through maybe a little bit of an internal control monitoring and to have a little bit of an assessment done. So, but some of these oversight and monitorings that not only can be done by the board of directors, but also, just other members of management that aren't already within those functions. So reviewing of bank reconciliations, but make sure that we're doing that with supporting documentation. Receiving the bank statements in and taking a look at them, making sure that they make sense. Is there anything that is out of the ordinary? Periodically reviewing payroll reports, specifically out of the payroll system, not really provided to you by the person that does payroll, for fictitious employees and reasonable pay. Payroll is actually is a scheme that we see most often when I get calls in to do certain things is payroll, because it is easy to manipulate, easy to add people on. And kind of an oversight, because a lot of organizations use outsourced payroll and they think, well, they're overlooking everything and taking a look, and that may not be the case. So kind of going to speed through these. We got about 8 minutes left, but if you are a check signer, do not just sign a pile of checks. Make sure that you are looking at the invoices that go along with that check to make sure that that's a viable expense to the organization. Every nonprofit has budgets, and we should utilize budgets and that are prepared, and not just, we finished our budget and stick it in a drawer. We should do budget assessments on a monthly or quarterly basis. So really using that budget as a tool. Request supporting documentation when you're reviewing financial statements. So if something looks out of the ordinary and it's just kind of something that maybe doesn't make sense, request the supporting documentation or some further information. And ultimately, and we'll talk a little bit more about these things, but be aware of the organization, be aware of the functionality, stay in tune. I can tell you, if you're just going to a board meeting once a month or quarterly for an hour, and you're not spending any time at the organization or volunteering in any way, or time with your executive director or other members of management, it's very difficult to be that highly functioning board member that really can give all you can give, plus being able to monitor what's going on in the organization. Some helpful tips on detecting irregularities is adopt a yearly budget, like I said, and use it as a monitoring tool. Perform financial ratios to determine irregularities. So if you look at, if our revenue went up, our AR should go up. Just some of those common types of financial ratios. Reviewing reconciliations for stale or old items. One of the easiest way to manipulate a bank reconciliation is through stale or old outstanding checks. Not to tell anybody how to commit fraud, but that's a simple one. So those are always in those old outstanding checks that can be reviewed. Periodically reviewing vendor lists for unknown vendors or vendors with similar names. It's crazy how easy it is to open a bank account. Especially online, now that we can do that quite often. So that's another thing that COVID has opened up, is the availability of online banking and how easy it is to get one of those. And it's very simple for, I'm with VonLehman. I could set up get something that said Stephanie VonLehman. Obviously that's not my name, but, and have checks written, and most banks, sadly, will cash a check written to VonLehman if my name is Stephanie VonLehman, just as an example. Review journal entries to accounts receivable or accounts payable. They shouldn't have journal entries, so if they have any, that's odd. Reviewing payroll journals and W-2s, obviously for any fictitious people that have been set up. Just be aware and be up to date. So a couple other recognitions and triggers to watch, and this is more in terms of the financial pressure or the rationalization, but people living beyond their means with no real reason as to why. Increased stress. Not saying all of these things lead to fraud, but they could. Recent divorce or family issues, changes in behavior, unusual tardiness that hasn't been there before, changes in attitude, certain other behaviors, and then, increased complaining or negativity are just some things that we talk about, that fraud triangle, the financial pressure or rationalization of things. So ultimately, the board responsibilities. What are your responsibilities? So If you don't like or understand the information that you're receiving in terms of financial information, your financial packet, say something. You're less likely to be an efficient and effective board member if you're not sure what you're kind of looking at or it doesn't make sense. Inquire of your executive director how they structure the internal controls. Are you aware of the vulnerable areas and risks of your organization? When we talk about vulnerable areas, that's where we're talking about the opportunity. What part of internal control do you play? Do you know that you are part of the internal controls, and do you understand them? And I think one of the biggest things I want to come back to too is that just because the executive director performs a procedure, that doesn't mean the task is always a safeguard. They're still an employee of the organization. They're still considered a member of management. They can play a monitoring and that type of role, but they can't be the end all be all of anything. So this is just a little takeaway with the exact same information, just in a little nicer format, just in case you wanted to keep or share with other board members. But I do, 4 minutes shy. So Aaron, I'm happy to answer anything else that may be there. And obviously, if there's anything, I can answer it individually with people. But I'm open to any questions, and I certainly do hope that you had at least one takeaway from today. And I certainly want to thank everybody for joining us. And Aaron, and PBPO, thank you again. It's always a pleasure to be able to share some resources that we have with organizations and being able to partner with PBPO. So my contact information will be on the slides that Aaron or Veronica will be sending out. So again, I just want to thank you. But Aaron, I guess I'll turn it back over to you. I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you.
Yeah, we do have a few questions if you're willing to take those.
Yeah.
Are there local accounting firms that could do an audit of our internal control policies?
Yeah, so, using the word audit. So I will tell you that most accounting firms do perform internal control consulting engagements. That's normally what we refer to them as. An audit of internal controls is a really big, open, wide thing that comes with a lot of things that are not very beneficial to organizations. So when we talk about those types of engagements, but they normally do them in the scope of consulting engagements. We certainly do them, and I can tell you that other regional type accounting firms in our area do these types of functions. Yes, so it's something we do quite often, and just which is something I love to do because it means that people are taking an interest in providing good opportunities to keep people's monies safe. So yes, most accounting firms, I'd say 70% in our area will perform some type of function. Yes.
Thanks. The next question is, we just had an employee leave. They were trustworthy and had access to our accounts. What do we need to do now?
Yeah, and this is not just if they have access to your account. So every organization, when you talk about, we had talked about onboarding of employees, the offboarding of employees is just as important. So it's kind of taking the onboarding portion of that and flipping it. What do we need to cut ties with? First and foremost is making sure that every single cloud-based software or anything that they may have logged off of, that is removed. Any access like that. Anything to the physical location of your building, their email is turned off. All of these things should be turned off absolutely as soon as possible. The moment, if you have somebody that leaves very quickly, the moment they leave, if they have banking activity or access, you need to call the bank right away and do not leave the phone off the bank until they have confirmed that they have taken them off of all accounts. And actually have them post if there are concerns, and really you should do this anyway, have them post into the account, into the software itself at the banking institution to flag it that you have had an employee turnover at your organization for some time, 6 months, that type of thing, just in case there is a fail down. Because if they had a good relationship with the bank that was right across the street and they're not aware that they left, there are things that, there are controls at banks that fail too. And that's kind of one of them. I'll take you back to the Rita Crunwell situation. That's how she was able to do so much. She was friends with the person at the bank. So make sure if they had banking access to go ahead and call the bank, have the accounts flagged that only these certain people can talk because we're in a turnover situation.
All right, I've got one more that I think is a good one for us to close on.
Okay.
I'm the executive director. My board, all caps, really needs to watch this presentation. They don't seem to be taking this very seriously. What can I say to them?
Yeah, that is tough. So, and two, if you're not comfortable, let me know when your board meets and I'll be there. And we do this quite often, and we talk about the risk. And the biggest thing is to talk about the risk that could happen at the board level. And when I do an audit and when I do internal control reviews, my biggest thing is to make sure that my clients, especially the ones I do internal control reviews on, is to make sure that we don't end up in the paper. And I don't want my client in the paper. The board needs to understand that that's the capabilities, and we don't want their names in there. So you can stress it as much as you want, but at the end of the day, if you have, let's say you have 6 to 8 board members and not a single one of them understands the importance of things like this and how you may feel vulnerable as that executive director, because you know how much things could come back on you if anything went south, even if you didn't do anything. It seems to me like you may need some board turnover, and you may need some find some board members, or at least half of your board members, that are going to stress it to the other board members. Again, I'm happy to do that for you. We do it quite often, come in and talk about the importance of these types of things, various scare tactics. But you know, if you can share this with them and ask them to bring one talking point to the next board meeting. You know, it sounds like you may need a strategic session a little bit in your organization. But if you find yourself with a board that consistently does not seem to want to engage in the topics that you're bringing up, or solid topics such as this, when we talk about risk management and risk tolerance, you may need a couple more board members to really, you know, kind of start that venture for the rest of the board and really get them to understand as well. So I will say good luck to you, because that's a tough road.
Stephanie, that's all the questions and all the time that we have. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it.